What are creative ways to give away possessions when you die? Well, let's first talk about life insurance. When a person passes away, if they have a life insurance policy, that policy is immediately paid to the beneficiary that's named on the policy. A beneficiary is just a person who benefits from the policy. That money does not go through a will. That money does not go through a trust. A life insurance policy is immediately paid to whoever is listed as the beneficiary. If that person doesn't exist any longer because they've passed away before the policy was, before your death and the payout was needed, then either the insurance policy goes to the next named beneficiary, what's called a contingent beneficiary or secondary beneficiary. And if there is none, or if that person has passed away, then the life insurance policy goes to the estate of the person who passed. And that estate then is handled either by a will or a trust. You might be wondering, can you name a trust as a beneficiary on a life insurance policy? Yes, you can. The trust can be the entire beneficiary, or the trust could get half the proceeds and the other half go to a spouse or somebody else. So there are a lot of options as far as who gets the life insurance policy, but just keep in mind, what's on the policy is what matters. Any other documents are irrelevant. The beneficiary named on the policy is who gets it. Now, if you have the beneficiary named as your trust or your estate, then of course it would go through those processes. How do you give a retirement plan when you die? A retirement plan has a named beneficiary. In other words, when you set up a retirement plan, there is a person named as the beneficiary of that account. It's essentially a bank account or an account with a financial institution. Whoever is named as the beneficiary gets that money. Can you name a trust as the beneficiary? You absolutely can. So the retirement account does not pass through a will and does not pass through a trust unless the trust is named, of course. A retirement account goes immediately to, on the day of death, the person who is named as the beneficiary. Can you have multiple people named as a beneficiary? Sure. You could say, to my 4 children, 1/4 each, or 25% each. You could say 50% to my spouse, if I'm married at the time, and the remainder divided equally among my children who are then living. And if any of them predecease me, my child's share, who predeceased me, will go to my child's descendants. There are a lot of different ways to write this up. Now you might be wondering, how do you write all that on a little beneficiary line on a retirement account? Often you can't. Often you have to keep it really simple. And if you want to get complex, you may need to make your trust the beneficiary and then put all those instructions in the trust. How do you give real estate when you die? There are a few different ways to transfer real estate when you die. First, many states allow you to use what's called a transfer on death deed. The acronym is TODD, sometimes called a TOD. A transfer on death deed is a document that you sign prior to your passing and file with the county recorder's office or whatever is the appropriate process in your state. And upon your passing, the property immediately goes to whoever you named as the beneficiary. So it might be your spouse or your children. What's really important about this is the property bypasses probate. It bypasses anything in your will. So you can have a transfer on death deed, avoid your home going through probate. That's one option. The second way to make sure real estate gets to the person you want to get it upon your passing is to use a will, or to not have any estate plan at all. Whether you have a will or no estate plan at all, it will go into probate. Probate is a legal process where the court looks at the statute and at the will and determines who should get your items. If you have a will, the court follows the will, assuming it's valid and binding. If you don't have a will, Then the court looks at the statute, and the statute has default rules about how assets are divided or distributed among your next of kin. The final option for transferring your real estate is through a trust. The important thing about this is you need to set up the trust before you pass, of course, and you need to transfer the real estate into the trust. Once you've done that, that real estate is no longer part of your estate. It's no longer governed by your will. Everything in the trust is governed by the trust. And you can appoint somebody who manages the trust. The name for that is trustee. And that trusted person, that person who you are relying on, will execute the instructions you've provided in the trust agreement. So, what are the 3 ways to transfer real estate after your passing? You can either do it through a transfer on death deed, a will, or no estate plan at all, which either way will send it through a probate in the court, or through a trust. So, transfer on death deed, probate, or trust. How do you give a vehicle when you die? This is very similar to real estate in Minnesota. You can essentially file a document with the state government, the department that handles motor vehicles and licensing and registration. You can file a document that says, upon my passing, this person should get the vehicle. You name them as a beneficiary. That's on file with the state, and then upon your passing, the person who is the beneficiary can simply go to the state with your death certificate, and the state will transfer ownership to you. That's option number 1. Option number 2, you can have it handled through probate. So if you don't have a will, or if you have a will, either way it goes through probate. By the way, probate is not avoided by a will. Put another way, a will never avoids probate. A will is the instructions for the judge in a probate. So whether you have a will or none at all, that vehicle will go through probate and a judge will decide who gets it. And then finally, you could put that vehicle in a trust. And it's important to make sure you actually transfer title of that vehicle into the trust in order for the trustee, that's the person you designate to manage your trust, to have authority to take care of that after your passing. How do you care for a disabled child after you die? There are a couple options. If this person is so disabled that they're not able to care for their own affairs, then typically a custodian and or guardian will be appointed by a court to represent them and to care for them. You can allocate money in a will that goes to that disabled child's personal assets. So it goes to the child. But if they can't handle their own assets, then the custodian or the guardian would be making decisions regarding those assets. Usually the better approach is the second option, which is a trust. In fact, often people use a specific type of trust called a special needs trust or a supplemental needs trust. These options, which go by different names in different states, allow for somebody appointed by you to care for the needs of a loved one who has special needs or disabilities under law. And this can be during your life and it can be afterwards. So if you have somebody, a loved one with disabilities, who you would like to have your assets used to care for them, then I would encourage you to work with an attorney who is used to setting up and has experience setting up a trust for special needs individuals. All right, so let's go back to the big question here. What are creative ways to give away your possessions after you pass? Well, if you do a little planning in advance, often you can name a beneficiary for your property so that whether it's a home or a vehicle or another type of property, like a bank account, that can immediately transfer and not go through a will or a trust. The second option is a trust, but you need to make sure you transfer the assets into the trust before you pass. And the third option is a will or not having a will, and either way, it goes through probate and a judge decides. There might be one other option, and that's just simply give it to the person ahead of time. In fact, that's something more and more people are doing, because instead of waiting for that gift to be a blessing on that person's life after you pass, many people are choosing to give the gift during their life. The benefit of that is you get to enjoy the rewards of giving, and you get to see how your gift benefited the life of your loved one.